Let's have a look at how does the architect do his work. If you look at the standard on architecting, what you then see is that they say that architecting is a matter of defining viewpoints, where a viewpoint is the combination of a stakeholder and a concern. And every system, every problem has many different viewpoints because we have many stakeholders and every stakeholder has many concerns. And what an architect does is that the architect looks from many different viewpoints at the problem. Now, a problem is that we humans cannot do many things at the same time. So rather than looking at the problem and the system from many different viewpoints at the same time, we hop from one viewpoint to the next. So maybe we start at thinking about the cost of ownership from the perspective of the customer. That based on that thinking we jump to the street price as seen by the marketing manager, which may relate to the amount of time that we need for testing as seen by the product leader, which may relate to the functions that we have to test, etc. So we jump on one viewpoint to the next, and if you look at the brains of an architect and the way that that person is working, then the viewpoint hopping is happening quite fast. In the head of the architect is jumping from one point to the next, and in that way creates an understanding of the system and the problem. Now, if we elaborate this a little bit further and we look at the path of exploration as the architect is following it, then we see on this graph, we see that we have subjects on the horizontal axis and we have the level of detail on the vertical axis, and that we start with a problem at a high level, for instance, the price of the system, the cost price of the system, that based on the fact that we think, well, the cost price is somewhat high, that we decompose it in a more detailed breakdown of the cost, that we even go further in the decomposition of the cost, and that we reach a component where I think, well, this component is very expensive. What function does it have and what performance? And then we change the topic from cost to performance or function, and that we think, well, this component is doing this detailed function, where does it contribute to the overall functionality? And we zoom out again. So the architect is not only jumping from viewpoint to viewpoint, from topic to topic, but also is zooming in and zooming out, and all of this is happening quite fast. So what's happening is, in the head of the architect we have a very chaotic process. What would happen if the architect would follow this way of thinking while speaking out loud to the stakeholders? Well, the answer is evident. The stakeholders would get totally confused. They cannot follow what the architect is telling. So typically this is happening inside the brains of the architect, but the architect is not doing this with the team in its entirety. In this course, we will follow a set of principles to achieve a set of objectives, and we will drive a set of recommendations that we'll follow in the following lessons in order to achieve this viewpoint hopping in a more structured, in a more analytical way, so that the stakeholders can follow what we do and we still achieve the goals that we saw in the previous schematics. There are two main principles that we base our work on. The first one is the principle of feedback, or working incrementally, working evolutionary. Feedback means we have an idea, we look at the consequences of our idea, we test whether our idea is proper or not. So all the time we look, are we moving in the right direction? Will our thoughts, will our ideas bring us where we want to be? The second principle is the principle of being explicit and making things tangible. So one of the common problems in many developments is that we have so many uncertainties and unknowns that people tend to escape in the known things, while the challenge is to make explicit and to make tangible what's unknown or what's uncertain. Those two principles, we apply them for the following objectives. The main things that you want to achieve as an architect is you want to support communication, you want to facilitate reasoning, you want to support decision making, and you want to create and maintain the overview, the understanding and the insight. And those objectives are based on the two principles. And you can do that by following the recommendations. And these recommendations are: use limited time boxes. So don't try to solve an entire question at once, but make sure that you only spend a limited amount of time in it, and that relates to iteration. That means that you later have to come back to it and you have to iterate over the topic. Then we recommend to quantify early, because that makes things tangible. And to measure, because that helps to validate part of the feedback. And that you use multiple levels of abstraction. As you've seen, you have to understand the system at different levels of abstraction. Then you have to think about and be aware of the accuracy and the credibility of what you're working on. You have to use many views. You have to see the system in its context. And you have to visualize what you do, because visualizing again helps to be explicit and making things tangible. If we look at architects, then architects tend to be generalists. They have a breadth of knowledge, while typically many other players are specialists. They have one topic where they have depth of knowledge. We need only a few generalists in a team, and we need many specialists. In practice, the world is not that black and white. In practice, we have specialists, we have more all-round specialists, we have what we call more square people who have certain breadth and a certain depth of knowledge, and then we have system architects who are very broad and who have only depth in one of the regions which we call the root. They need root knowledge. If an architect doesn't have root knowledge somewhere, then the other engineers, the other colleagues don't take the architect serious, because they feel, they sense, they smell that this architect is too superfluous. So what we have seen is an architect in the brains of the architect is quite chaotic. What we try to show in the course, what we will try to help you to learn, is how to get from this chaotic state of mind into a more structured way of working. And what we also have seen is that the architect contributes by being a generalist, contributing in breadth and helping all the people with specialist knowledge to contribute to the whole system.